Good, okay, we're ready to go. Hal, let's hear what you have to say.
What the hell is happening to your country? This is a quote from a European, unnamed for privacy, from a country, unnamed for privacy, that has steadfastly backed the United States alliance, European alliance with the U.S. until just a few weeks ago. Quoted by the columnist Anne Applebaum in The Atlantic, this European is a professional, he's a bureaucrat if you will, he's one of the experts who have the background and the knowledge to advise the political appointees. As Applebaum says, these people provide the soft tissue of global security. What the hell is happening to your country? How many of us here this morning remember the board game Diplomacy? It was popular in the 1960s and 70s, and maybe still is somewhere, I don't know. It's not a game of chance. There's no dice, no cards. It's a game of strategy and alliance and betrayal. Diplomacy, the terrain of the board, comprises the 7 great powers of Europe as of 1901. Great Britain, France, Germany, Austro-Hungary, Italy, Russia, Turkey. Each player represents one of these players, or if there are fewer than 7 players on a given occasion, maybe 2 or 3 powers. Between moves, we analyze strategic positions on the board and prepare our next move. Let's say that this morning I'm playing Turkey. I study the board, see an opportunity to humble Austria-Hungary if I can form an alliance with Russia. Let's say Karen is playing Russia. I offer her free transit of the Dardanelles, the exit from the Black Sea. She accepts. And then in the next move, oh, treachery, she has betrayed me by making a secret alliance with Germany. I'm ruined, my army is annihilated, and Karen's Russia is now the mistress of Eastern Hungary and the Black Sea. Oh, what fun, right? In fact, this is a rather gross approximation of how diplomacy did operate in the 1800s. Empires seized opportunities to expand their power. This was called diplomatic realism. Nations have no permanent enemies or permanent friends, but they have permanent interests. In the 20th century, Henry Kissinger was an exponent of this view. Permanent interests, no permanent enemies or permanent alliances. Hence the Nixon-Kissinger opening to China. It was an age-old model described by the Greek historian Thucydides during the Peloponnesian Wars.
That was the scream of a wounded nation.
I don't know whether all of you heard that. Ron says that was the scream of a wounded nation. Okay, we're talking about diplomatic realism now. No permanent enemies or permanent friends, but they have permanent interests. This model was described by Thucydides, the Greek historian, 2,500 years ago during the Peloponnesian Wars. The strong do what they will, the weak endure what they must. The World Wars I and II shattered that model. It was replaced by an order, I'm proud to say, led by the United States. The first principle was no taking of another country's territory by force. Hence, a global institution, the United States, was set up to secure global order, to preserve peace. It was to be a rules-based order, internationally accepted laws, inflected with moral principles, that as nations would bind themselves to abide by laws administered by international organizations, the World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and many others, International Court of Justice. It wasn't perfect. Where do you find perfection in this world of selfish, fallible human beings? But this international order led to 80 years of relative peace and prosperity worldwide, scientific discovery, an integrated world in many ways. In most countries, not all, but in most countries, statistics measure gains in life expectancy, infant mortality, the quality of diet, civil freedoms, and so on. We, the world, had moved beyond might makes right. We measured human well-being by how governments met human needs. And to a great degree, this order was created and led by the United States. And now this order is shattered. True, over the last 20 years, it was getting increasingly fragile. As long ago as 2005, Michael Mandelbaum published a book titled The Case for Goliath, How America Acts as the World Government in the 21st Century. But Mandelbaum was pessimistic in the end. He concluded with 3 forecasts. In the not too distant future, America would tire of its leadership role and pull back. When it did, no country would replace us, nor would anyone thank us. So it was already happening, this American withdrawal. It was not invented by Donald Trump. But on February 24th of this year, the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Donald Trump did deliver the coup de grace. The United States stood with Russia in opposing a UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion and demanding that Russia withdraw from Ukrainian territories that it had seized by force. In fact, the resolution passed handsomely, 93 in favor, 18 against, 65 abstentions, including China. So the world voted against Russian aggression in Ukraine. And who sided with Russia? The United States, of course, with Iran, North Korea, Israel, Hungary. Well, I will list them all. Haiti, Palau and the Marshall Islands, the African countries Burkina Faso, Burundi, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Niger and Sudan and Belarus, Syria, Eritrea, Mali and Nicaragua. These are America's allies in Trump's brave new world. Dictatorships all. Oh, and don't forget El Salvador, where the United States shipped those hundreds of Venezuelan alleged terrorists this week. The Salvadoran leader, Nayib Bukele, has called himself the world's coolest dictator. Vigorous diplomacy by many nations in the 4 weeks, just 4 weeks since that day, is about adjusting to the new reality, not about trying to revive the old one. Pax Americana, the American peace, is dead. America is no longer the proud leader of the free world. Is it even in the world, engaging with the world? One of Elon Musk's first activities with his Department of Government Efficiency was to shut down the U.S. agency that administers foreign aid programs throughout the world. A week or so ago, he closed down the agency that runs Voice of America, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, Radio Marti, Radio Free Asia, broadcasting America's story to the rest of the world. And Vice President J.D. Vance told a European audience, perhaps rather more bluntly than necessary, that America is done with subsidizing Europe's defense and is going to spend its wealth improving the lives of our own people. Is this a new isolationism? Ever since George Washington's warning against foreign entanglements, America has harbored an isolationist current. 2 oceans protect us. We have farms and factories. We don't need the world. Alone, we can flourish. Well, let's shoot that down right away. Trumpism is not isolationism. Remember Orwell's 1984. 3 great powers ruled the world. Oceania, that is the US and Britain. Eurasia, Russian and its European satellites. And East Asia, China and its dependencies. Was this prophecy? In recent weeks, since the UN vote, I read much punditry predicting exactly this. The world carved into spheres of interest. American, Russian, Chinese. Spheres of interest. As many of these pundits scramble to find a way forward in an apparently leaderless world, at least one feels vindicated by Trump's brave new world. John Mearsheimer is a scholar of international relations at the University of Chicago. Before I go any further, I must assure you that Mearsheimer is not some Trump-worshipping know-nothing. He's got a reputation. He's 77 years old, still rather callow by the standards of University House, but a serious expositor of a serious theory of international relations. He toils in the wake of Thucydides and Henry Kissinger. Permanent interests, but no permanent enemies or alliances. Mearsheimer argues that interaction between great powers is primarily driven by the rational desire to achieve regional hegemony in an anarchic international system. That is, the international system is fundamentally anarchic. So with this bedrock assumption, on which the theory stands, follow four more assumptions. One, great powers inherently possess some offensive military capability. Two, states can never be certain about the intentions of other states. Three, survival is the primary goal of great powers. And four, great powers are rational actors. That is, within this framework of assumptions. They act rationally. Values, morality, should play no role in foreign policy because they will divert, distract, undermine nations' understanding of their unchanging national interest, misunderstanding of which can lead to national disaster. This is not the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world where the lion and the lamb lie down together and the bear and the cow feed from the same trough. For all I know, Mearsheimer too would like to live in such a world, but as he says, that is not our world. Thus, he takes Putin's side in assigning responsibility for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Yes, he takes Putin's side as a dry-eyed, rational scholar. NATO was encroaching on Russia's sphere of interest in Eastern Europe. Well, you can see all those blue countries lined up against the yellow there, which is Russia. Actually, the Scandinavian peninsula, this map's slightly out of date because Finland and Sweden are now also NATO members, but they weren't at the beginning of the Russian invasion. Eight former Soviet republics in the Baltic region and in Eastern Europe had been accepted into NATO, and now Ukraine itself was heeding the siren song of the West. Putin, a rational actor, in Mearsheimer's view, had to defend Russia's sphere of interest. I cannot tell you how much I hate Mearsheimer's argument. It denies agency to small nations, the ones that Thucydides said endure what they must. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, the Baltic republics. They had no right to choose their own destiny. They had to remain part of Russia's sphere of interest. Not one of these countries was conquered or coerced by the United States. They chose their destiny. They joined NATO and the European Union because their leaders and their people wished not to be Russian subjects. But then I am an idealist and a dreamer. Within the framework of his schema, Mearsheimer is certainly right. Putin had no choice but to put a stop to the encroachment on his sphere of influence. I not only hate this argument, I disagree with it as it is applied to the Ukraine war. Yes, indeed, Putin saw developments in Ukraine as a threat, but what was the threat? Not a NATO invasion of Russia. The existence of a democratic and prosperous Ukraine allied with Europe posed a domestic threat to Putin. It could show Russians that there was a better alternative to Putinism with its privations and repressions. That is why Putin chose to eliminate Ukraine as a country. So this is our brave new world, a plunge forward into the past. But let's see what it means for various actors and institutions that have built or opposed the Western status quo for the last 80 years. Putin, at least for now, appears to be the biggest winner of all. He spent 3 years in a frustrating, stalemated war that he expected to win within weeks. Some statistics. For several months, the count of Russian war casualties, killed and wounded, has run up more than 1,000 a day. Yesterday, just yesterday, it hit the milestone mark of 900,000. So how much Ukrainian land has Russia grabbed for the sacrifice of 900,000 fighters? 1/10%. This Russian territorial gains, and you see there's a wobble there at the beginning, which actually is just about when the invasion started, but it's flatlined throughout most of the last 3 years. 900,000 fighters. Well, Ukraine statistics are considerably less, but and Ukraine is a much smaller country, a less populous country. 1/10%. Since 2014, which is really when Putin's Ukrainian war started, In 2014, it annexed Crimea without firing a shot and took over some industrial provinces in eastern Ukraine. Since that time, with those moves, Russia has occupied 18% of territory recognized internationally as Ukrainian land. 18%. Just in the last month or two, roughly since President Trump switched American sides in favor of Russia, that 18% has grown to 18.1%. Maybe the tide has turned. Viewed objectively, this war has been a gigantic embarrassment for the world's supposedly second most mighty military machine. In addition to the 900,000 fighting men lost, Russia has run out of modern tanks and has to pull Soviet-era tanks out of mothballs to keep up the onslaught. And when it runs out of Soviet tanks, Soviet-era tanks, then what? It has already run out, or very nearly so, of modern transport vehicles. And we are seeing photos of artillery shells and the like being moved to the front on carts pulled by donkeys. Here's one with camels. I don't vouch for its authenticity, but it's showing camels on the front line. Is in World War I, we still had horses pulling wagons. Another, and this one apparently is authentic, shows troops moving forward on bicycles instead of trucks. Ukrainian drone operators naturally find bicycles a softer target than armored personnel vehicles. Still, mock Putin's army as we may, oh, it's such fun. Russia has not slackened the intensity of the fight. Can it keep going indefinitely? American and European sanctions have not crippled the Russian economy, but it has certainly weakened. The official inflation rate is stated as 10%, but unofficially reckoned as double that, driven by rising food prices and war spending. War spending is now 40% of the state budget. The key government interest rate is 21%. The value of the ruble is now about a penny. For the cost of just, let's say a month's rent at University House, plus parking, I could be a ruble millionaire. Russia is a huge country with nearly 4 times the population of Ukraine. In a war of attrition, you would expect the side with its advantage in numbers and territory to grind down the opposition. Instead, 3 years of fighting have produced massive death and destruction, but a battlefield standoff. Quite clearly, Putin's war has been a major blunder, but now Donald Trump appears to be, what's your favorite cliche? Pulling Putin's chestnuts out of the fire. Delivering victory to Putin from the jaws of defeat. Saving Putin's bacon. Well, all credit to Putin. Here he is, Putin walking his dog. All success to credit to Putin. He succeeded in removing the greatest impediment to the realization of his vision for Russia, United States opposition. But I'm not sure that this cartoon, much as we enjoy the lampoon, is entirely accurate. I think Trump knows very well what he's up to, which is maybe even more terrifying than the notion that he is a stupid sap being manipulated by Svengali Putin. The ripple effects of Trump's reversal of alliance will be global, but let's focus first on European fallout. When Donald Trump first won the presidency in 2016 due to the oddity of our electoral college system, our European friends could shrug the world-weary shrug of sophisticates patronizing the jejune misadventures of an enthusiastic but adolescent, naive polity. We used to hear a lot of that from Europe. But now it's happened twice, and there's no going back. Here's Friedrich Merz, winner of last month's elections in Germany. Actually, that's Putin. But the quote is from Merz. He leads the center-right Christian Democrat Party, and he will become Germany's next chancellor, probably in coalition with the center-left Social Democrats. Hours after he was elected, he said on national television that he would try to achieve independence from the USA. I never thought I would have to say anything like this on a television program, but it is clear that the Americans are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. Let me repeat that. Americans are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. How shocking that sounds to most of us in this room. We know Europe. We may have ancestral ties to Europe, may have traveled there, written postcards from there. Some of us studied in Europe or have worked there. Some have fallen in love in Europe. We're fond of Europe. The English with their charming attachment to a celebrity monarchy. The French with their intellectual pretensions about the meaninglessness of life. The Europeans gesticulating wildly as they talk, but they love children, and their cuisine is non-pareil. What wouldn't it? Non-pareil cuisine. That's not Italian, is it? That's French. Yes, well, there are stereotypes on both sides. What Europeans find endearing and exasperating about Americans is their ability to master any language but their own. Stereotypes on both sides, but the point remains, Americans and Europeans are practically like family. Big brother, kid sister, bossy aunt, loopy uncle. Peculiarities, personalities are what we love about each other. How can Americans be largely indifferent to the fate of Europe? Actually, it's worse than indifference to Europe. This administration seems downright contemptuous of Europe. Vice President Vance's speech in Munich last week accused Europe not only of sponging off the United States for its defense, but also of abandoning its own values of free speech and open elections out of fear of the right-wing movements, similar to MAGA. They're rising in many European countries. Contempt. What else was the treatment of Ukraine's President Zelensky in the White House by Trump and Vance? Or the response to a fanciful suggestion by a French politician that France should reclaim the Statue of Liberty? There's the Statue of Liberty running riot over a wasteland. It was our gift to you, argued Raphael Glucksmann in a speech to a gathering of supporters of his small party, the Public Place Party. But apparently you despise her, so she will be happy here with us, Glucksmann said, winning applause and whistles from his audience. Of course, that will not happen. A more self-assured White House might have responded with good-natured jocularity. Not this White House. Absolutely not, snapped Carolyn Levitt, the White House press secretary. And my advice to that unnamed, low-level French politician would be to remind him that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country. By the way, Ms. Levitt's unnamed, low-level French politician does have a name, as I said, Raphael Glucksmann, and a job, member of the European Parliament. That's low level. I would like to pause for a few moments to deliver a eulogy for the U.S. Agency for Global Media, the umbrella agency that provides support for all those Radio This and Radio That outlets that I mentioned earlier. They've been reaching global audiences of more than 400 million people weekly. Be assured, Russia and China stand ready to fill the empty screens and social media feeds. Propaganda agencies? No. The Americans have been pretty canny about that. Radio Moscow and its various siblings and imitators belched out propaganda. The American agencies, well, at least back in the 1970s and 80s when I needed them for my work in communist Europe, the American agencies had the self-confidence to tell the truth, even about the United States. For example, it acknowledged racism in the United States, even as it cited ways in which our country was trying to overcome it. And Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe were trusted by their foreign audiences, who knew from daily experiences that their governments did nothing but lie. I have a personal anecdote that I hope testifies to the usefulness of these broadcasts in generating American soft power, that is not military might, but cultural attraction. On a visit to Warsaw in September 1982, I learned that I had become a minor celebrity. As I was changing money at the hotel desks, the two clerks said, "Oh, we've heard of you." It seemed that just the day before, Voice of America had broadcast two of my stories, either in whole or in part. Similar encounters had happened to me in an earlier posting in the Soviet Union. The Moscow government jammed the broadcasts, but Russians would seek them out, if only to find out what their government did not want them to know. More than once in Soviet Russia, most of my colleagues and I would run into thoughtful citizens who appreciated hearing our side of the news. Of course, sometimes we ran into others who recognized our names from invective published in Pravda or other government outlets. Wise guy that I am, I used to keep 3 trays on my desk, not in, out, and pending, but memorializing all the journalistic sins that Pravda and other Soviet mouthpieces accused me of committing. Box 1 was for my slanderous fabrications. The next held my routine anti-Soviet lampoons. And finally, my fables interweaving blasphemy with calumny. Say what you will about the Soviet Union, it was pretty good at invective. I used to wish that my readers back in Baltimore felt so passionately about my writing. Now, back in Warsaw, I asked the desk clerks if they found Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, more or less accurate. Some mistakes, they said, but a true picture. I pressed. Orban says, Jerzy Orban was the government spokesman. Orban says that we lie. Orban lies. Succinctly, they shot back. Now keep in mind, these young women were hotel employees and I was a hotel customer. It was their job to please me. Nevertheless, I cherish this story as an example of the soft power that America used to possess. I doubt that telling my story to Elon Musk will do any good, though. Meanwhile, in Europe, leaders are discussing the path forward in the face of Trump's America First policy. The leaders of Britain, Germany, and France agree that henceforth Europe must provide its own defense. They're crafting a coalition of the willing to help Ukraine. Several NATO countries, notably Germany, already have sufficiently increased their defense spending. Italy and Spain say they're not sure they want to keep contributing to Ukraine's defense, so perhaps that leaves them out of the coalition of the willing. Finland and Ukraine are signing defense agreements. 3 years ago, Finland and Sweden were long-standing neutrals. Now both have joined NATO. So much for Putin's reputation as master strategist. The Baltic states pulled the plug on electricity from Russia, and that has implications for Russian-occupied Kaliningrad. There's the map there. Kaliningrad is this tiny little thing between Lithuania and Poland, a little sort of yellowish strip there. This is getting complicated, but I take it up now to show how interwoven territorial claims in Europe, how interwoven they are, and elsewhere for that matter. Maps in current textbooks show only current reality. 800 or 900 years ago, Teutonic, that is German, knights conquered a chunk of land up in a corner of the Baltic Sea. Before World War II, this was on the maps as Königsberg, or German East Prussia, an exclave surrounded by Poland and Lithuania. After World War II, the Soviet Union gobbled it up and renamed it Kaliningrad for some Soviet poobah, Kalinin, and also gobbled up Lithuania and Poland. So it didn't really matter because it was all in Soviet Union by this time, or Soviet control. And there it sits to this day, nominally a piece of Russia, bordered by 2 NATO countries, Lithuania and Poland, and a choke point. Last week, Lithuania released footage of the literal cutting of power lines transporting electricity from Russia to Kaliningrad. The Russian-occupied exclave is now on its own for energy. There's still a gas pipeline going from Russia to Kaliningrad, or was. I haven't caught up with today's headlines. Poland offers its territory to base NATO nuclear arms. And way over on the other side of the world, South Korea is talking about maybe we're going to need a nuclear deterrent up here next to China as we are, and North Korea. Slovakia. Poland offers its territory for nuclear arms, but will not send soldiers to Ukrainian soil as a security force. Well, no, Russia really might be sensitive to the idea of Polish soldiers on its what it sees as its territory. Slovakia will not send soldiers to Ukraine in any capacity. Slovakia? Yes, the other half of Czechoslovakia, independent since 1993, a NATO member since 2004. Oh, Slovakia. Does anybody care? Yes. As the Europeans ponder the way forward in a US-less alliance, membership reshuffling may be required in NATO and in the European Union. If Slovakia chooses to entrust its security needs to Russia, perhaps NATO should let it go. Same goes for Hungary. Then can both remain in the European Union? How about the three neutrals, Austria, Switzerland, and Ireland? Surely they must be viewing their security needs in a suddenly more challenging environment. Two bureaucrats in London's Whitehall must be beavering away to reverse the democratically determined decision in 2016 that Britain should exit the European Union. Past endeavors exploring the idea of a European homecoming for Britain have been met somewhat frostily in Brussels, not exactly because of anti-British animus, but to drive home the point that the European Union is not a club that you can hop into and out of at transient whims. Today, I imagine the European Union would presumably offer generous terms for the re-entry of its erring British brethren. All very well, but seriously, can Europe, without the United States, mount a credible counterforce to Russia? It can, if it has the will. The European Union and the UK combined have 10 times Russia's GDP. European aid to Ukraine has long exceeded US aid, and Europe could easily replace America's share. In the early stages of the war, the US provided the bulk of military aid, but even that gap has greatly narrowed. There are some important weapons systems that America may stop supplying that Europe cannot quickly replace. But as Phillips Payson O'Brien, a strategic studies scholar at St. Andrews University in Scotland, has pointed out, we've been hearing predictions of Ukraine's imminent collapse for at least a year, when the reality is that Russia has achieved only minor territorial gains at immense cost in men and material. So it really comes down to Europe's political will. Well, enough geopolitics. At the risk of being laughed out of University House, I would like to take a cautious look at the intellectual underpinnings of some of what is going on. Okay, much of what is going on is not intellectually underpinned, but let's take a closer look. We in America are not the only country with, as we see it, a know-nothing right-wing movement. Most European countries, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, have right-wing, not just conservative, but far right-wing political parties gaining strength in recent elections. One of these parties, the Brothers of Italy, succeeded 2 years ago in winning the prime ministership for its leader, Giorgia Meloni. In Germany's election last month, conservative parties finished 1-2. 28% of the vote for the traditional conservatives, the Christian Democrats, the party of Konrad Adenauer, Helmut Kohl, Angela Merkel. In second place with 21% was a Johnny-come-lately right-wing alternative for Germany, ahead of the Social Democratic Party, which once led by Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt. It is easy to dismiss these right-wingers as motivated, just like our MAGA movement, by unwanted immigration. And that certainly is an important issue in Europe as migrants stream into prosperous Western Europe from North Africa and the Middle East. But opposition to mass migration is not limited to these right-wing parties. Many mainstream parties express the same concerns. And this is where we get to the intellectual underpinnings of the right-wing threat to traditional democratic order. Viktor Orban is the democratically elected, just like Trump, dictator of Hungary. He seems to have provided the governing template that Trump is following: intimidate the legislature, defy the courts, concentrate all power in his own hands. I've never seen Orban hailed as an intellectual, but here's a brief excerpt from a speech he gave in 2014 describing his worldview. The strength of America's soft power is in decline, and liberal values today embody corruption, sex, and violence, and as such discredit America and American modernization. This sounds very like routine conservative diatribes voiced every day against American society. Too much sex and violence, kids today are lost and adrift, and so forth. But also, in a way, is there not an echo of progressive diatribes against American society? End-stage capitalism, systemic injustices, and so on. Of course, we are right and they are wrong. But it isn't interesting that both left and right know, yes, know, that something is wrong with the world and something is wrong with America, and it needs to be diagnosed and set right. Obviously, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. Power is his lodestar. Falsehood and intimidation are his methodologies, and that's all there is to it. On the day in 2017 that Trump was inaugurated to his first term as president, I explained to my diary that Trump was not the cause of our political disquiet, but was certainly an accelerator. And so he is today. Not the cause, but the accelerator. Now, if you want philosophic underpinnings, look no further than Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Brought up in Soviet times in the classless society, a product of the KGB, Putin is a latecomer to the exaltation of the Russian soul, to Moscow's theological and political destiny as the Third Rome, successor to ancient Rome, with the Russian world carrying forth the legacy of the Roman Empire. So see, that's the real reason he had to invade Ukraine. No, seriously, in the last couple of years, Putin has written volumes about this Third Rome concept. Well, and now look at this aerial view of his dacha on the Black Sea. The Russian word means summer cottage. These are not the digs of a man who spurns capitalist ostentation and yearns for a return to spiritual values. Crown his brow with wreath of laurel, the Emperor Vladimir I. Okay, enough fun mocking philosophy's piggyback riders. This criticism of the modern world is serious, and it has been around for a while, and it is growing. Think Friedrich Nietzsche and his most famous quote, "God is dead and we have killed him." Europe at the time was experiencing a cultural shift. Science, reason, secularism were all gaining prominence. Nietzsche observed that the traditional religious worldview, which had long served as a foundation for moral values and meaning, was losing its influence in the modern world. Think Martin Heidegger, whose main claims were that one, technology is a way of understanding the world. Two, that technology is not human activity, but beyond human control. And three, that technology is the greatest danger to humanity. Think Alexander Solzhenitsyn, delivering the commencement address at Harvard in 1978. He argued that the United States had declined in terms of its spiritual life and called for a spiritual upsurge. He added, "Should someone ask me whether I would indicate the West, such as it is today, as a model to my country, frankly, I would have to answer negatively." He critiqued the West for its lack of religiosity, materialism, and a decline in courage. He critiqued what he described as the calamity of an autonomous, irreligious, humanistic consciousness, which has made man the measure of all things on earth. Imperfect man who is never free of pride, self-interest, envy, vanity, and dozens of other defects. So this current is the enemy of the Enlightenment, of rationalism, which has been intellectually more grounded in the Western and European and American world for 300 years now. After Solzhenitsyn's Harvard address, many Americans accused him of ingratitude. The United States had delivered him from Soviet tyranny, and he had the nerve to criticize our free society. Shades of Zelensky in the White House a few years ago. My point with all this is that there has been a strong, right-wing, if you will, a strong current of criticism against what we think of as American leadership American hegemony long before Trump came. The fact that most of the voters of Italy, Germany, Mississippi, and Wyoming, and so on, have not read Nietzsche, Heidegger, or Solzhenitsyn, does not mean that they have no cause to be dissatisfied with the world as it is. They are dissatisfied, even if they cannot articulate it other than by voting. As we have seen and are seeing, the unscrupulous would-be dictators take advantage of this discontent. Can we acknowledge that we have had a sense of cultural superiority, that we're leading the world into a brighter future? Pray that it is not too late to reclaim and correct our American experiment in government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Let's give the last word to a very famous Russian, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. That's us, friends, swamped by those weeks when decades happen. I'll take questions.
As we look at these three spheres of influence, they're all in the northern hemisphere. What about the southern hemisphere? Will we be competing spheres of influence there, or will leaders arise there and the same thing happen in the southern hemisphere?
Well, there are an awful lot of dictatorships in the southern hemisphere as well. Yes, I think so. I mean, there's a kind of a neo-colonial, I don't know if you'd quite call it that, competition in Africa for resources. The Chinese in particular are very active there, and in Latin America, building infrastructure projects and things like that as a way of gaining access to materials that they need. So yes, I think that's exactly what would happen, yeah. Or is happening already.
In the U.S., we're seeing the impact of a ignorant, irresponsible jackass. I saw just recently a new definition of the Department of Government Efficiency. It's now called the Department of Government Extermination. And it's very difficult to imagine the impact, how badly the government that everybody needs to have our complex society function is going to be destroyed and lead us into some who knows what god-awful form of anarchy.
Anarchy, well, possible. I didn't talk at all, or deliberately, I didn't talk about domestic policy and what's happening inside the United States, except peripherally as it applied to the world. But yeah, you spoke well, Ron, summed it up.
With the United States retreat from supporting Europe, has that in fact negated our participation in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? And if so, what does that mean for the future of powers that have or want to have nuclear capability?
I haven't heard anything about it at this time anyway. I haven't heard anything about withdrawing from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but 8 years ago, was it 8 years ago? Yeah, when Trump's first term, he did pull out of a couple of nuclear-related agreements. And in Europe, they're talking about, now, should we have an independent nuclear deterrent? Poland, well, I've said that Poland was offering to have missiles, nuclear weapons stationed on its soil, but even talking also about maybe trying to build some of its own. So the nuclear question really very much is, has opened up, at least for study and speculation. No decisions have been made that I'm aware of about the treaties.
You know, if somebody younger and quicker than I wants to do my job, I would be very willing to pass it down.
I thought you wanted to, I'm sorry.
Passing the torch.
It certainly seems that the world's right right-leaning population admires Russia and others for their moral stance, but this seems like a really poor choice for moral leadership. I mean, Russia sends murderers to England to kill off enemies. It did in Navalny for just being a single man in opposition. I don't understand the right's attraction to that sort of posturing.
Strong men can get things done. I guess that's the idea. You mentioned Putin killing off his opponents. There have been a lot of, I didn't talk about that this time, but there have been a number of cases of people cutting cables, ships dragging anchors across power lines in the Baltic, and even sabotage in factories and that sort of thing, which eventually seem to trace back to Russians. These are events that are happening in Western Europe. So that yesterday, when we all read about Heathrow Airport being shut down because of a fire, my first thought was, I'll be darned, you think that's more Russian sabotage? Well, it just shows how my mind is getting warped. The authorities quickly shut that down. No, they said it was some technical problem of some sort. But, yeah, you're right. Why is it that people are attracted to that kind of leadership? What was his name? Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore was a dictator too, but he was a benevolent dictator. He actually left his country better off. So there can be good dictators, not many of them.
Please bear with me. I've had some dental work and I may garble a little bit, but Americans seem to be in a state of denial over the fact that we're entering a dictatorial condition. Have the Europeans are they also thinking the same way? They know that America's in a state of decline, but do they also recognize the fact that we're becoming a dictatorship?
Well, I think they do. And the fact that they've got their own right-wing movements, they're very chary of them. There will not be a coalition, even though two conservative movements, the Christian Democrats and the Alternative for Deutschland, finished 1 and 2 and could probably pretty nearly put together a coalition by themselves. They did something like 48, 49%. But they've ruled out, and this is true in most of those countries that have these right-wing parties, France and Britain as well, that they said there's no going into coalition with these parties. They don't trust them. They do look at Orban in Hungary, and I guess now they're looking at Trump in the United States. And so, I think they're well aware of the dangers. That's why they are refusing to cooperate with these groups.
I think Doge is going to look very different 6 months or a year from now than it does right now, as the benefits of our bureaucracy fail to appear. Do you have any sense of what it's going to take to rebuild once we get rid of the current status quo? Kind of a big challenge.
Yeah, more than my tiny mind can absorb or envision. As I said, I wasn't really doing any work on the domestic consequences of this, but I think that to some extent it'll be. I don't know whether it'll be utterly irreparable, but I think it will take a long time, and it would take America coming together more than is seen now. It's interesting that not only we've been feeling a secret sense of glee that all these Republican congressmen have started to evade going out to press the flesh because they're afraid of getting chewed out at their town halls by their fellow Republicans who voted for them. Well, now the Democrats are having town halls where they're being attacked and assaulted by their fellow Democrats for not doing something about it. So it's going to take a while to sort this out. I hope it happens while we are all still within our lifetimes, because that means it'll be fairly soon.
I don't think there's any way to estimate the long-term effects
that these people are having on health and science. I think that it is beyond comprehension what the long-term impacts are going to be of stopping science and of stopping the development of new healthcare resources.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, what do? You've got a laboratory where work is going on, and now you have to pull the plug on the lab rats or the whatever it is, or the computer, and hope that the science will stay still so you can come back and pick it up in a few years. But it won't. Hal again?
Okay, yeah.
Well, a colleague of mine who was studying the Air Force buying new fighter jets, and they buy one or two, and it wasn't really a force worth anything. Why are you doing that? Well, we don't want the talent to get away. I think that's going to be a huge issue of all the things being shot down and all the talent getting away.
Yeah, you read that. It seems to be so indiscriminate. At first, or one thing they were doing at first was getting rid of the probationary workers because they thought they didn't have any protection. And anyway, these guys are on probation. I mean, they committed crimes, right? I mean, that's what probation is for. Well, apparently some of these very young tech pros, 19, 20 years old, that are going to work for Musk, were thinking that way. They thought that's what probation meant. So of course we clear them out first. Those are the weak links. But no, you're talking more not about the probationary workers, but about the people who know what they're doing. Yeah, some of them will retire early, and some of them will be let go, and yeah. No, it's real damage. Doug.
Some of the economic conservatives are today rationalizing the Doge assault by saying that's the only way we can install AI in the federal government. We don't need all those people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so if you don't, AI can just take over, do all the thinking for all the people that aren't there anymore, and you don't have to pay them. Sure, wonderful idea.
But who's going to feed all these unemployed people?
Wait till we can't hear you.
I think most people are, but we're creating a huge number of unemployed people. They're going to exhaust their own resources, and then there's going to be one just hell of a fix. How are we going to maintain and feed these people?
Oh, that'll be Congress's problem.
Thanks.
It was The Economist, the magazine's position that that Russia was invading Ukraine because of its own declining population. Obviously, this war is going to actually not add very many Ukrainians, and has eliminated the young men pool in Russia to a large degree. Where do you see that leading?
One thing that Putin has been campaigning for is for Russians to have bigger families. Now, it'll be, even if they start having bigger families, it'll be quite a number of years before these new boy babies grow up to be soldiers. But that's one of his fixes. It was a great virtue of the Russians that it was pro-family. People have 6 or 8 children. Right, sure, that'll solve. I mean, it's the kind of logic that is coming out of Russia today.
Hal, you mentioned that the status that we're probably in. What kind of opposition do you see internationally to the rise of authoritarianism?
Well, Europe has been concerned about this for a number of years, partly because of Orban, and also for a while Poland was drifting in that direction. And then just 2 or 3 years ago, co-opting the courts, neutralizing, changing the Constitution, all kinds. And then they had an election just 2 or 3 years ago, and Poland really snapped right back into a pro-European position. Yeah, thank goodness. Well, all of us are sitting around complaining about the rise of authoritarian, and that authoritarianism. I suppose a lot of Germans were complaining about it in the 1930s. Huh? That didn't work out very well, but maybe it'll work out better this time. The United States has been through some disappointing spells and crises before to come through. This one looks like it's going to be harder to reverse, but that's about all I can say.
If we ever get back to a rule by the Democratic Party or majority rule there, maybe we have to worry that the opposition will employ the same tactics of writing letters and coming to town hall meetings and whatever we're doing. So I'm wondering, in terms of our opposition, if we need to think about, there seems to be a new dimension of opposition emerging from this particular crisis, and how is that going to play out in the future with possible changes in the government?
Well, yeah, you raise an important point, I think, Doris, is that the tenor of political discourse has become so rancorous, and of course, yes, of course, as our speech, this is the way we talk now. This is the way on both sides that we talk now. Insults and exaggerations, and on one side, outright lies, which of course we would never stoop to. So yeah, I think your concern is well founded.
The question is not really relevant. My question is not really relevant to what you've been talking about today, but every time you deliver one of your superb Saturday morning talks, I've asked this question, so I'll ask the same question today, and that is, do you see any developments in Russia toward fundamental political change, i.e. Putin losing his grip on power in Russia?
No, I don't. Not at the moment. I don't. No, it was the way things were going. I think you could have mentioned something like that. As recently as a month or so ago, because it was going badly. It was going badly domestically and certainly on the battlefield. His last chance was that the election of Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump would support him. So I don't see it at the moment, because all of a sudden Russia's prospects look much better. So wow, good old Putin, he did that. I've been so negative and disappointed. I'd like to give you at least one piece of good news. I read this, where did I read this? There's no truth to this rumor that Trump is also demanding that Ukraine become the 54th state. After Canada, 51, Denmark, 50, or Greenland, 52, and Panama Canal would be, and then Ukraine would become our 54th state. 55.
Thank you so much, Hal.
I'd also like to thank Karen, who put together the slideshow and found all that stuff and surfed the internet and brought back some jewels. So thanks, Karen.